I went to college in Moorhead, Kentucky, and this was back in 2017, I think. There are these old mining caves called the Mushroom Mines, and they aren't in use anymore, but it is a hot spot for spooks and exploring. People always say crazy stuff goes down there, like cult rituals and etc., but I only believe the occasional drug deal or something. Someone said police found a goat cut in half down the center of its face there, but I never saw evidence of that, so I don't believe it even today. Me, my friend Teddy, and my boyfriend at the time decided to go to the caves around 2 or 3 p.m. one afternoon after class. I can't remember who, but I think we had 1 or 2 other friends with us, maybe Teddy's friend, because I honestly can't remember. When we got there was another car parked outside the caves, and it seemed like it didn't belong to anyone crazy. It was a lime green little thing, clean as what we could see, with the windows rolled down, maybe because it was hot as hell outside at the time. No one was around that we could see though. That wasn't really weird because there were a lot of hiking trails next to the cave, and no one was in the mouth of the cave, so we assumed that they must be hiking. So we're exploring the mouth of the cave and only go maybe 10 to 20 feet deep, because if you've been to a mine or deep cave before that isn't in use anymore, you know it's pitch freaking black and cold. We did have flashlights, but we still weren't trying to go a mile in or anything. All of a sudden, Teddy just asks, "Did you guys see that?" This immediately sends chills down my spine, and I think he's just trying to scare us. My boyfriend goes to where he's standing and asks what he saw. As Teddy is explaining that he thinks he saw a small light turn on way deeper down in the cave, a small light clicks on, way further than we are down in the cave, as if it's reacting to his acknowledgement. It was a light from a flashlight. It clicks back off, and we take a second, and we get the hell out of there. So guys, I don't know what to think of this at all. They didn't have their light on when we first showed up, so they were what? Just hanging out down there, in the dark? They didn't say hi to us, or speak at all, and it's weird that it seems like they almost tried to get one of our attention, instead of again just calling out and greeting us all. They also had no idea we were coming, or that anyone would be coming. We had all skipped our afternoon classes, so most students wouldn't even maybe be there until 5 to 6 to explore. Please tell me what you all think. I haven't gone back since. Obviously, I don't think it was a monster or ghost, but if anything, people freak me out more, especially ones who hang out in old mines alone with no light. Back when I was in high school, my friends and I loved exploring creepy places. A few of us had our driver's license, so on weekend nights, we would gather up a group of 6 to 10 people and go on an adventure. One summer, our favorite place to go was this abandoned movie theater on the west end of town. This place had closed down, probably about 3 years before we started visiting it, and in that time, it had become a run-down building. There were no trespassing signs on the front entrance and each of the fire exits around the building coming from the theater rooms. The glass at the main entrance was all broken and had been boarded up. The front door was busted and didn't latch or lock, so people were able to get inside. We knew there had to be homeless people crashing in there, but we were young and dumb and felt invincible in a group. It was part of what made it scary. We would always wait until between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. to go into places like this because we didn't want anyone to see or hear us and report us to the police. We all explored it together the first 2 times we went in. The screens and seats were all torn up inside each of the maybe 8 rooms. The bathroom mirrors were broken and there was graffiti everywhere. We were fairly sure there were people hiding in there while we were inside, even if we never saw anyone the first 2 times we went. There were a couple of shopping carts from a nearby Fred Meyer's inside with cans and bottles in them, and a few dirty blankets scattered around in different rooms. It looked lived in. After getting to know the layout of the place the first couple trips, we made a game of it for the 3rd and final visit. This time, the 6 of us that went split into 3 groups of 2, and with our partner, the 2 of us would enter the front together and spend a full 5 minutes inside, while the others waited outside at our chosen exit in the back of the building. The first 2, Beck and Doug, both went in while we waited outside. About 7 minutes went by, and just as we were starting to worry that we should go in after them, They made it out the other side, through the fire exit. Doug told us that they went upstairs into the office, and there was a sleeping bag that hadn't been there on the last visit, and as soon as they went up and saw it, they tried to leave immediately, but they got turned around and tried to leave through the wrong exit, which was sealed shut. They were paranoid that they were being followed out, so they just stood there watching the way they entered the theater room for a minute, making sure they didn't hear any noises, before they finally worked up the nerve to run out the correct exit in the room across the hallway. Doug and Beck both wanted us all to leave, but Jack and I weren't having any of that and insisted on going in. Brad and Drew, the other group of two that was going to go in last, wanted to come with us, so the four of us went inside while Beck and Doug both waited by the exit. The first thing we all wanted to do when we got inside was go check out the upstairs office. Just as we started to make our way up the stairs, we all heard a loud banging sound. It was coming from the back of the theater. We all agreed it had to be Beck and Doug trying to scare us so that we would come out and we could leave. We got upstairs and the pounding stopped. Doug was right. There was a sleeping bag rolled out on the ground with a few paper bags set up around it. Brad flashed a light in one of them and saw a syringe and something that looked like a vibrator. We were all pretty grossed out and had a little laugh about it. We looked around up there and didn't really notice anything else interesting, and we were starting back down the stairs when the pounding started again. We decided we should probably make our way to the exit. I hoped we hadn't been caught trespassing by the police. We came out through the exit, and immediately both Doug and Beck were talking over themselves to tell us about a minute after we entered the theater, a really tall, creepy, homeless-looking man with greasy hair walked right past them, heading for the entrance. Beck said hello as he passed, and the guy stopped, turned, and kind of lunged a few inches toward him before stopping. One side of his face was really wrinkly. Beck thinks maybe he was a burn victim or something. The guy stared him down for a second, and then without saying anything, turned and walked around the corner where we had gone inside. They started pounding on the door right after he was out of sight to try and warn us there was a scary dude in there with us. We were in there for about 5 minutes with this guy, and we never saw him. He had to have heard us and hid somewhere. We started to walk back to our car in the Fred Meyer parking lot, about 100 yards away from the theater, and our car pulled into the parking lot and shined its headlights on us, before flashing its red and blues. The police officer had us all sit down in front of the spotlight in front of his car and asked us what we were doing. We told him we were going to head inside the movie theater, but a really scary tall guy walked in, and we chickened out. He told us that it was really dangerous to go into places like this, and there had been violence in the building before, and it'd be a shame if we got hurt doing something stupid. He let us go, and as we drove off, we saw him shining a light inside the front entrance. We took the nice police officer's advice and never went into places like this again. I never did find out what violence he was talking about. It could have just been a tactic to scare us out of coming back. We stuck to graveyards and cemeteries after this. Creepy dude that lives in condemned buildings, I'm glad I never actually met you, but thank you for getting me out of a ticket for trespassing, and thanks to everyone else hiding in the building for not assaulting myself or my friends. Back in 2014, I was a 20-year-old community college student living with my parents in Southern California. I had a tight-knit group of stoner friends. There were 5 of us, myself included. We're all still best friends today. Like all bored suburban kids, our days hanging out usually consisted of loitering in parking lots, getting stoned, and going to parties when we could. We had a few smoke spots around town we would go to and get high at. Our main spot was a place called the Sewer Lair. It was a giant storm tunnel at the end of a trail in this canyon area behind one of the local neighborhoods. It was secluded, and we could be as loud as we wanted since there were no houses nearby. The tunnel was maybe about 20 feet in diameter. A small stream of water ran down the center of it. There was this offshoot directly to the right just past the entrance that led to another smaller tunnel system. This is where we would hang out. We would come here almost every night. So one night, we were at the Sewer Lair. It was maybe around 1 a.m. We would usually hang out pretty late and wait for our parents to go to sleep, so we don't come home and have to see them smelling like weed and cigarettes. Me and the boys were smoking, talking, and listening to music, the usual. Except this night, water was draining from one of the tunnel systems further down. It was pretty loud. It sounded like a small waterfall. This had happened a few times before, so we didn't think anything of it. We don't get much rain in California, so it made sense that this would only happen once in a while. A few hours in, one of the guys kept looking over at the main tunnel. Says he thinks he's hearing voices. We tell him it's just the music and our voices echoing, but we turned off the music and listened silently to prove that he's just stoned and being paranoid. We listened closely and we could hear these faint voices. It was difficult to hear because of the waterfall, but it sounded like a group of people chanting. We froze and traded glances. We sat in silence and listened for a few minutes. One of the bros finally snapped and insisted we go check it out. A few of the bros were scared and didn't want to do it, but after some bickering, we decided to go see what was happening. There was 5 of us. What could go wrong? So we used the flashlights on our phones and make our way down the main tunnel. We walked for about 15 minutes and the chanting got louder, but it still sounded very far away. We still couldn't make out what they were saying because the waterfall was so loud, but it was definitely a group of people speaking in unison. We walked for a while longer. At this point, we made it so far that there wasn't even graffiti on the walls or trash on the ground anymore. As we continued walking, we noticed that the tunnel was getting warmer. It was always really cold here, so it was strange that the temperature was gradually rising the further we went. We kept moving. The chanting was getting loud, so we knew we were close. It was loud enough to realize that the chanting was in a different language and that it had to be at least 4 or 5 people. We kept moving and noticed the graffiti on the walls started to show up again. It was different than before though. It was all very eerie. I immediately brushed it off as just edgy kids trying to scare people. But the further we walked, the more unsettling the markings on the walls became. It was a lot of weird occult type shit. There were melted black candles scattered on the ground with these weird trinkets around them. The trinkets looked handmade and were made of animal bones, string, and cloth. We were all quietly inspecting the area when one of the guys points down the tunnel and tells us to cut out the lights. We turn off our flashlights and look. We could see a faint, flickering orange light far down the tunnel. It was barely visible because it was so far, but we could tell that the light was coming from either candles or torches by the way it was flickering. It wasn't a direct light either, so it had to be coming from one of the offshoots in the tunnel. Our phones were all low on battery, so we started speed walking toward the orange light. The chanting continued. Then out of nowhere, a blood-curdling scream bellowed from the tunnel up ahead. We all froze and put our lights down. It was the most horrifying scream I've ever heard in my life. I couldn't even tell if it was human or an animal. The chanting continued, then another horrifying scream echoed down the tunnel. The guys were ready to get the fuck out, but I insisted that we check it out. I led the way as we slowly walked towards the light. The chanting and screaming continued. We made it about 30 feet from the offshoot that the light and voices were coming from. The tunnel was very hot at this point and it smelled awful. The air was thick and it was difficult to breathe. We were sweating and it felt like we were suffocating. We inched our way towards the offshoot as the chanting continued, flinching every time there was another awful scream. The screams had become increasingly more violent and non-human sounding. We were all lined up, our backs against the wall of the main tunnel in front of the offshoot. The chanting and screams were coming from right around the corner. The boys gestured at me to take a peek. I took some deep breaths. My heart was pounding. I quickly peeked in for a second, then pulled back. This offshoot was exactly like the one at the entrance we would hang out at. At the center was a naked man on his knees, with his hands on the ground and his back to me. He was covered in dirt and sweat. He was in front of what looked like some kind of handcrafted altar. The walls were covered in writing. The whole area had crowds of black candles lining the walls, and they were all lit. There had to be at least 50 or 60 of them. The man was also sitting at the center of some kind of candle formation. My face went numb. I looked at the guys and couldn't even speak. The chanting and screams continued as I just gave them a blank stare. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. The chanting and screaming sounded like it had to be a total of at least 5 people, but there was only one guy in there. I decided to take another peek mid-chant. This time, my whole body went numb. All of the chanting and screaming was coming from this one man. It was like he had 5 voices at once. I gestured to one of the bros next to me to take a look. He stepped forward and his foot brushed against the ground, making a loud scraping sound that echoed. We all froze. Then the chanting completely stopped. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was dead silent. We all looked at each other. Then out of nowhere, we made a sprint for the entrance all at once. None of us even said a word. We just ran as fast as we could. It felt like we were running forever. We hauled ass for about 10 minutes before finally getting out of the storm tunnel. We stood in the field in front of the sewer layer and caught our breath. A couple of the guys were throwing up from the sprint. After we caught our breath, I told them everything I saw. They were all speechless, trying to comprehend what just happened. We started hearing screams from the tunnel. This time they were long and drawn out, almost like a howling wolf. We ran up the trail to the neighborhood and got the fuck out of there. We vowed to never come back again. This was 6 years ago, and it still haunts me and the bros today. I have no explanation for what happened. I don't know much about Satanism or cult-type shit, but if anyone does, feel free to give your thoughts on what you think was happening that night. Would really appreciate it. Thanks.